Asperger's Syndrome and Employment by Genevieve Edmonds and Luke Bearden. Adults speak out.
I've been quite outspoken about this. I don't like the process that I think really in Western society we have of interviewing people for jobs. I don't understand why we do it. Why is it seemingly seen as invariably a good way of ascertaining whether somebody's good at a job? Unless that job involves sitting there being interviewed, I don't necessarily see that it correlates to identifying whether somebody's good at a job. Interviewing somebody tells you how good they are at being interviewed. It doesn't necessarily tell you how good they are at doing the job that you're interviewing them for. So I think we ought to really reconsider like the whole process of why we interview. And when people grumble, they say, oh, no, that's just how the way we do it. I always challenge people and say, do you know somebody that you've employed that's turned out completely useless? Everybody always says yes. And you say, well, therefore the system is flawed. It must be. Otherwise you wouldn't have employed that person through the interview process. I think we ought to be working towards potential employees' strengths and offering it to them. So look, we're quite happy to interview you if that's the best way of you representing yourself. But actually, if you're better representative of yourself, why don't you send us, and you stipulate it, a 15-minute presentation about yourself that you've uploaded onto a private YouTube channel based on the questions that we've got during interview. It takes exactly the same amount of time. It's no additional work for the employer. They can watch the video footage in their own time when it suits them. It's just as equitable, I think, and it just opens up an additional opportunity for somebody for whom interviews might actually put them at a substantial disadvantage. So I think we just need to, going back to, I suppose, the analogy with schools in terms of having a wider scope of what's actually available to pick and choose from, that are still equitable. I think we should be doing exactly the same in terms of job opportunities. And I think, again, it's a win-win situation. It decreases the anxiety and potential discrimination for the autistic person, and opens up avenues for the employer to pick and choose from a wider audience. So I genuinely think, that there's, going back to imagination and innovation, why aren't we coming out with more innovative ways of identifying who might be good for the job? And the other thing is, years and years ago, I was lucky enough to run a work group on autistic employment at the government, and all of the autistic people just said, let us do the job. Just let us do the job and see how good we are. For 5 minutes or a day or an hour or however long is compatible with your schedule. And I'm perfectly happy to accept if I'm not very good at it, don't employ me. But if I am good at it, give me the job. I thought it was quite sensible. We need to look at all of those things that are causing anxiety. So how do we engage with the child and make sure that they feel safe?
If you want to know what this actually is, the sense of safety, here is an awesome website dedicated to the sense of safety, which is a bit more complex than just having a roof over your head and food in your belly. It's so much more. It is the environment for autistics, very important. The social climate, relationships, the body, the inner experience, the sense of self, and meaning and spirit.
Safe. How I as a child feel safe going back into an environment that might be super scary. And then it comes down, I think a lot of it comes down to the two I's, imagination and innovation, I think are absolutely critical in working in the autism field, and recognizing that actually working from home has its ups and its downs. If you're an autistic person who has ups and downs, make sure you record exactly what they are, what works for you and what doesn't, and put forward a case to your employer and say, well, actually, this part of my job, I'm super effective at working from home, super effective. I know I am. I wake up in the morning, I can be at work 5 minutes later. As an hour's drive into the office, and if I'm an hour's drive into the office, I end up proper stressed by the time I get to the office, so it takes me another hour to calm down, by which time it's practically time to come home again. Now I can do hours and hours and hours of work in my dressing gown. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Here, that like I walk 20 feet into my office, and I'm teaching people in Dublin, and I'm working with kiddos in the north of Ireland and so on and so forth, kiddos that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to support previously. So I suppose that's the other positive to working online, is that people do have the opportunity to work with people that perhaps they wouldn't have had the opportunity to work with before. Do you know?
I've been pre-recording sessions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that somebody can stream them. So if my internet fails, at least I'm still talking. I was in a really weird situation the other day, where somebody said, "Oh, I'm really enjoying your conference presentation." I'm thinking, "What? I'm at a conference. I've completely forgotten. I didn't need to be there. I'd done for already." That was so heavenly. That was like the biggest decrease in anxiety ever. You don't have to go and stand up in front of hundreds of people. You can just chat to your cat via the laptop. It's brilliant.
It is. And I think that's a very good point. I do the same here with regards to any classes. I know that last week that the internet went in between, dropped completely for 2 classes, one after the other, consecutively speaking. So I spent this Sunday gone recording 6 different sessions. Now, granted, it was about 12 or 13 hours work, but it didn't matter because I'm able to just breathe now, and I'm due to deliver a class today, but I don't need to worry that the internet, if it goes, that the students won't be able to access the class. So I suppose it's a good anxiety management strategy, if nothing else, to kind of pre-record like that.
Adverse childhood experiences and the impact on brain, body and behavior. And for autistic individuals, what is traumatic might quite differ from what is traumatic for a non-autistic child. And we need to be aware of that difference to prevent invalidation, gaslighting, devaluation, even ridicule or shaming in the autistic individual.
A child's experiences early in life are important building blocks for the developing brain. Genes, nature, are like the blueprint. They provide the basic framework for brain development. However, genes do not design the brain completely. Environmental influences, nurture, fine-tune how the brain works by shaping which brain connections get used. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent, whereas ones that do not get much use fade away. Together, genes and the environment build the foundation for all future development. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships early in life lead to healthy development. But children's brains capture other experiences as well, stressful events. However, not all stress is bad. Positive stress involves normal childhood experiences, like starting daycare or meeting a new person for the first time.
See, this is already a difference. For an autistic child, the change in environment can cause stress and heightened anxiety. Meeting with a new person you have never met can indeed increase anxiety. And then there are all those other kids that you have never met before, and they make a whole lot of noise. And then the strange smells in the classroom. And it's a completely new routine, right? So all of that can totally make you go into shutdown, freeze, or just appearing to dream and not be present. But this is actually dissociation from an environment that is totally overwhelming. But everybody else is fine. And then you begin already to question, what is wrong with you? Why are you struggling and others are not? See? So this can be traumatic in the long term, especially when your environment is not supporting and rather gaslighting you. saying, "Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive. Everybody else is fine," and all of that. And we have seen the different an environment makes in the pandemic.
The current climate. I suppose, how has this dynamic impacted upon autistic individuals, specifically around their anxiety levels?
It's absolute glorious. I can chill at home and wear a onesie all day, and I don't have to talk to people that I don't want to talk to. And this is the best thing that's ever happened to me, quite aside from the awfulness of the pandemic itself. But I've had plenty of stories from autistic people of all ages saying, "Hey, I really like this. This is right up my street." So I do think that people do tend to sort of fall into one category or the other. And what I'm really aware of is actually for those kids, and I've had parents say this to me, it's like, we've got a new kid, you know, since lockdown, since the child is not at school, we didn't realize what our kid was like when she wasn't anxious. And all of a sudden she's chatty and, you know, she's literally a different child. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, what lesson do we really, really need to learn about this child then? So what kind of state were we putting her into before lockdown, and how are we going to protect her from that post-lockdown? So really valuable lessons to be learned without a shadow of a doubt.
Absolutely. And I suppose, Luke, can I ask you, with regards then to education specifically, in relation to that child, what kind of things can we be doing for that kiddo who has thrived in the home environment?
It's an almost impossible question to answer, because the provision is, for me, if I had a golden wand, I would want a range of educational structures that would support autistic children. And that is literally everything from home education to full-time mainstream school, and literally everything in between. I haven't got that golden one, but in terms of what we should be aiming for, that is what we should be aiming for. If it is demonstrated quite categorically that home education or that kind of educational provision is best suited to that child at that particular time, then why are we not providing it, you know, in a funded, supportive way? I've been in situations where a child has been struggling at school, and often mainstream school, but not exclusively. The child is been home educated, and literally sometimes within hours, if not days, the change in that child is just extraordinary to behold. And I've seen it with my own eyes, and it is amazing. And then you think, okay, well, how come we're not being supported, and how come parents aren't being supported to provide this as an option, when clearly it's by far the best thing for that child? Now, I'm not saying all autistic children should be home educated. That would be absolutely nonsensical. But as an option for those children for whom it is crystal clear that it's the best option for that child at that time. And very often what you find, or what I've found anyway, through experiences, where that child has that hiatus, and they have that opportunity maybe to catch up on some areas of development that they might have been struggling with as a direct result of that anxiety of being in that school where they were really struggling. All of a sudden they can go back into education a year down the line or 2 years down the line and absolutely thrive. So it's not black and white, oh, it's one or the other. I think that it's that range of provision we've got to be striving for. And it doesn't have to be expensive. You know, if you look at how much, say, for example, a specialist school placement costs, why isn't some of that funding, if a child is being home educated, can't go towards that, as long as there are proper structures around appropriate provision and all of those sorts of things. So I'm thinking we're talking about some years down, you know, in the future, but I think it's something to be aiming for definite.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right.
I find the social aspect of school extremely stressful and exhausting. Many people, including teachers, don't understand that this stressful social aspect also includes group work, class discussions, lab work, presentations, and even having to sit next to someone else. The social aspect does not just mean going to parties and having friends. Yes, I totally agree. are ready to sit next to the wrong person. That, to me, made really a big difference. So how are you supposed to be attentive if you are stressed by the person next to you?
But when stress is frequent, chronic, and uncontrolled, it is toxic to children, especially when they do not have a caregiver to provide support or buffer the stress. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, such as abuse, neglect, exposure to intimate partner violence, parental depression or addiction, and poverty, are toxic stressors which could lead to lifelong changes in learning and behavior. ACEs early in development can impact social, emotional, and cognitive functioning, increased risk-taking behaviors such as drinking and substance use, and increased risk of disease, disability, and social problems later in life. The question is, how do adverse childhood experiences impact a lifelong development? One of the most important systems in our body is our stress system. It's activated when we experience stress. We become alert, our heart rate increases, and so do our stress hormone levels, cortisol and adrenaline. Our body is ready to react, what is known as fight or flight. A short period of time after the stress is over, or if a child receives support from a caregiver, the stress response turns off and the body returns to a normal state. Adverse childhood experiences create stress responses that stay active, and without the support of a caregiver, the system has difficulty shutting off completely. This constant and prolonged activation can affect immune system functioning and increase the chances of sickness, infection, and disease.
So, as we have established, for autistics, different things can lead to feeling traumatized. By being stressed all the time, feel anxious all the time, and as a result, develop complex post-traumatic stress injury, which is here just PTSD, but it's not a disorder, it's an injury. And it's complex because it's ongoing for years. So you see, this is then the result. Anxiety, depression, and fight-flight is anger. Or the freeze response is sadness, guilt, or shame, shutdown. And this is a real problem.
Prolonged activation of stress hormones is also toxic to the brain. Certain areas of the brain are more vulnerable to toxic stress, including the executive center, or the brain's control center, an area important for solving complex problems, attention, reasoning, impulsivity, inhibition, and learning. A second area is the emotional center, the brain's alarm system, which is involved in processing and interpreting emotions and the ability to control impulses. The third area is the memory and learning center, the brain's filing cabinet, which plays a major role in learning and the formation and retrieval of memories. Science shows that adverse childhood experiences impact all of these brain centers. Behaviorally, what we begin to see is emotional distress, poor emotion regulation, greater impulsivity, learning difficulties, and physical and mental health problems. Cases cause changes in gene expression through a process called epigenetics, which helps us understand how nature and nurture interact. Epigenetics causes changes in the way genes work without changing the DNA code itself. This occurs through chemical changes influencing how the code is used. In other words, genes are like the hardware in a computer. They determine the boundaries of what is possible. However, we need an operating system to tell the hardware what to do. Epigenetics is like the operating system directing the function of a gene's DNA hardware. The genes we are born with are the genes that we have for life, but experiences like nutrition, exercise, smoking, stressors, and relationships all affect our biology. Adverse childhood experiences are associated with epigenetic changes related to stress, brain development, cognition, and systems associated with mental and physical health.
The key concept is, if you buy into the idea that there's a direct correlation between increased levels of arousal, and in this case we're talking about anxiety, and the ability to learn, or negative correlation. So if you accept, and this is something that I believe that the higher the arousal state, the more anxious the child is, the less able they are to learn. Literally, the brain is not able to learn compared to when you're in a nice, calm state. Now, if we accept that teaching is all about the ability of the child to learn, then surely part and parcel of that teaching process is to decrease anxiety. Because if we jump straight in and start teaching and a child is highly anxious, you might be the best teacher in the world, but it's not going to be effective. So I think part of that teaching process is to ensure that any child is at a low aroused state as much as is humanly possible. So we need to look at all of those things that are causing anxiety